I sat across from Mr. Hargrove, my boss, in his sterile office, the kind of place where the air smelled like paper dust and unspoken judgments. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly, as if it were counting down to something inevitable. His desk was a fortress of folders and pens, and he sat behind it like a king about to pass a sentence. I'd been at this job, marketing assistant at Hargrove & Sons, for 3 years, and I thought I'd carved out a little nook for myself, but the way he adjusted his tie and avoided my eyes told me that nook was about to collapse. "Clara," he began, his voice gravelly, like he'd smoked one too many cigars at last night's gala, "you've been a good worker, reliable, creative, even, but the numbers, they don't lie." He slid a spreadsheet across the desk, its rows of red ink glaring up at me like accusing eyes. "The last campaign didn't hit the mark. Sales are down, the board's breathing down my neck, and someone's got to take the fall." I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. "Mr. Hargrove, I can explain. The projections were off because the client changed their mind last minute." I adapted as fast as I could. He held up a hand, cutting me off. "Explanations don't change facts. Clara, I'm sorry, but tomorrow, I'll have to let you go. HR's already drafting the paperwork." The room tilted. 3 years of late nights, skipped lunches, and caffeine-fueled pitches flashed before me. This job wasn't just a paycheck, it was my lifeboat after the divorce, the thing that kept me afloat when everything else sank. I couldn't lose it, not now. "Mr. Hargrove," I said, my voice trembling but firm, "what if there's another way? What if I could prove I'm worth keeping?" He leaned back, his chair creaking under his weight, and studied me with those sharp gray eyes. "What are you proposing?" I didn't know what I was proposing, not yet. My mind raced, grasping for something, anything, to delay the axe. Then, out of nowhere, the words slipped from my lips, soft as a whisper but heavy with promise. "Give me one night, a magic night. I'll show you something extraordinary, something that'll change your mind." He raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "A magic night, huh? You've got my attention, Clara, but it'd better be good." I smiled, though my heart pounded like a drum. I had no idea what I'd just signed up for, but I had until tomorrow to figure it out. I left Mr. Hargrove's office with my knees wobbling, the weight of my own words pressing down on me like a storm cloud. A magic night? What had possessed me to say that? I didn't have a wand or a rabbit to pull out of a hat, and I was pretty sure he wasn't expecting card tricks. But as I walked past the cubicles, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, I felt a flicker of something, desperation, maybe, or defiance. I wasn't going down without a fight. Back at my desk, I stared at my computer screen, the spreadsheet still open like a taunting ghost. My mind churned. I needed something big, something unforgettable. Hargrove wasn't just a numbers guy, he loved flair, the kind of bold moves that made people talk. Last year, he'd raved about a competitor's stunt where they projected their logo onto the side of a skyscraper. Maybe that was my angle, spectacle. I grabbed my notebook and started scribbling ideas. Fireworks, a flash mob, a midnight presentation under the stars. Nothing clicked. They were either too expensive or too ordinary. I needed magic, not gimmicks. That's when my eyes landed on the photo pinned to my corkboard. Me and my sister, Elise, at the old carnival 2 summers ago. She dragged me to see a fortune teller, Madame Zora, who'd spun wild tales about my future with a crystal ball and a sly smile. I'd laughed it off, but Elise swore. There was something eerie about it, like the woman knew things she shouldn't. Madame Zora, the name stuck in my head like a burr. What if I could bring that kind of mystique to Hargrove? Not just a show, but an experience, something that felt otherworldly, personal, impossible to ignore. I flipped open my laptop and typed her name into the search bar. A rusty old website popped up, listing her as a psychic entertainer, with a phone number. My fingers hovered over my phone. Was I really doing this? Before I could second-guess myself, I dialed. A husky voice answered after 3 rings. "Madame Zora, seer of secrets, who's this?" "Clara," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need something extraordinary for tomorrow night. Can you help me?" There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Extraordinary's my specialty, darling, but it'll cost you. And I don't mean just money. Meet me at midnight, the old pier. Bring something personal." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my pulse racing. What had I just stepped into? The clock on my dashboard glowed 11:47 as I drove toward the old pier, the city lights fading into a hazy blur behind me. The night was cool, the kind that made your breath fog, and the streets were empty except for the occasional stray cat darting across the road. I clutched the steering wheel, My knuckles white in the passenger seat sat a small wooden box, something personal. Madame Zora had said I'd chosen an old locket from my ex-husband, a silver thing with a cracked heart charm it still felt heavy with memories I'd rather forget. The pier loomed ahead, a skeletal silhouette against the moonlit water. It had been abandoned for years, its boards warped and splintered, but the carnival used to set up here every summer. I parked near the entrance and stepped out, the wind tugging at my coat. The air smelled of salt and rust. I checked my phone. No signal, just great. A flicker of light caught my eye near the end of the pier. I walked toward it, my boots thudding against the wood, until I saw her, Madame Zora, perched on a folding chair beside a rickety table. A lantern cast shadows across her face, highlighting sharp cheekbones and eyes like polished obsidian. She wore a velvet shawl dripping with fringe, and her fingers glittered with rings. "You're punctual," she said, her voice smoky and slow. "Good, sit." I hesitated, then took the chair across from her up close. She looked younger than I'd expected, 40s, maybe, but there was something ancient in her gaze. "I need something big," I said, "something to save my job. I promised my boss a magic night." She smirked, tapping a long nail against the table. "Magic's not cheap, Clara. What's in the box?" I slid the locket toward her. "It's from my past. You said to bring something personal." She picked it up, turning it over in her hands. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I swore the air grew colder. "This'll do," she said, heavy with regret. "Perfect fuel." She set it down and leaned forward. "Tell me about this boss. What moves him?" "He's tough," I said, "likes bold ideas, things that stand out. He's letting me go because of a failed campaign, but I think he wants a reason to keep me." Madame Zora nodded, then reached into a bag beside her and pulled out a small glass vial filled with shimmering dust. "This," she said, "is possibility. Sprinkle it where he'll be, and the night will bend to your will. But there's a catch. You won't know how until it happens." I stared at the vial, my stomach twisting. "What does that mean?" She grinned, teeth glinting. "That's the fun part, darling. Take it or leave it." I took the vial from Madame Zora's outstretched hand, its glass cool against my palm. The shimmering dust inside caught the lantern light, swirling like tiny stars trapped in a storm. My mind raced with questions. What was it? How could it possibly help? But her cryptic warning echoed louder. "You won't know how until it happens." I wanted to press her, to demand clarity, but the way she watched me, like a cat eyeing a mouse, made me hold my tongue. "What do I owe you?" I asked instead, slipping the vial into my coat pocket. She leaned back, folding her arms. "The locket's payment enough for now, but magic like this has a way of collecting its own debts. You'll see." Her laugh was low and throaty, sending a shiver down my spine. "Go on, then. You've got a night to weave." I stood, the pier creaking beneath me, and glanced back at her once before heading to my car. She didn't move, just sat there, the lantern flickering like a beacon in the dark. The drive home was a blur, my thoughts tangled in possibilities. By the time I parked outside my apartment, it was nearly 2 a.m., and exhaustion tugged at my bones. But sleep wasn't an option, not with my entire future hinging on tomorrow. Inside, I set the vial on my kitchen table and stared at it. It looked harmless, like glitter from a craft store, but Madame Zora's words gnawed at me. "Sprinkle it where he'll be." Hargrove's office, then? Or somewhere else? I needed a plan, a stage for this so-called magic night. I grabbed my notebook and started sketching ideas again, fueled by coffee and nerves. That's when inspiration struck. The rooftop of our office building. It had a view of the city skyline, a spot Hargrove loved for client meetings. What if I lured him there under the guise of a last-ditch pitch? I could sprinkle the dust, and something would happen. Maybe a dazzling display, or a vision to sway him. It was vague, but it felt right. I spent the next hour drafting an email. "Mr. Hargrove, meet me on the rooftop at 8 p.m. I'll deliver the magic night I promised. One chance to change your mind." My finger hovered over the send button, doubt creeping in. What if this flopped? What if the dust did nothing, or worse? But I'd come too far to back out. I hit send. The reply came 10 minutes later. "I'll be there. Don't disappoint me." I exhaled, my fate sealed. Whatever this dust was, it had better work, or I'd be jobless by morning. The day crawled by, each tick of the clock a hammer against my nerves. I spent it at the office, pretending everything was normal, smiling at coworkers, nodding in meetings, while my mind churned with what-ifs. The vial sat in my purse, a secret weight I couldn't ignore. By 7 p.m., the building had emptied out, leaving only the hum of the HVAC and the distant glow of city lights beyond the windows. It was time. I took the elevator to the rooftop, my heart thudding in my chest. The door opened to a crisp breeze and a sprawling view, skyscrapers twinkling like a sea of stars. The river snaking through the city below. The rooftop was bare except for a few metal chairs and a low wall along the edge. Perfect, simple, a blank canvas for whatever this magic night would become. I pulled the vial from my purse and held it up, the dust inside glinting faintly under the moonlight. Sprinkle it where he'll be, Madame Zora had said. I paced the spot where I'd asked Hargrove to stand, near the wall, facing the skyline, and uncorked the vial. My hands shook as I tipped it, letting the shimmering grains spill out. They hit the concrete and vanished, dissolving into nothing. No sparkle, no glow, just gone. Panic clawed at me. Had I been duped? I knelt, running my fingers over the spot, but there was no trace. Come on, I muttered, glancing at my watch. 7:55. He'd be here any minute. I stood, brushing off my knees, and tried to steady my breathing. Maybe the magic was invisible until it started. Maybe I just had to trust it. I set up a small folding table I'd hauled upstairs, laying out a notebook with my best campaign ideas, back up in case the dust flopped. Then I heard the elevator ding. My stomach flipped as Mr. Hargrove stepped out, his overcoat flapping in the wind. He looked skeptical, his gray eyes scanning the rooftop like he was already regretting this. "Clara," he said, his voice cutting through the breeze, "this better be worth my time. I've got a dinner reservation at 9. "It will be," I said, forcing a smile. "Stand here, please." I gestured to the spot where I'd sprinkled the dust. He raised an eyebrow but complied, crossing his arms as he faced the city. I took a deep breath, my hands clasped behind me. "You wanted extraordinary. Watch this." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air shimmered, like heat rising off pavement, and I held my breath, waiting for the magic to unfold. The shimmer in the air thickened, rippling like water disturbed by a stone. Mr. Hargrove frowned, tilting his head as if he sensed it too. "What's this trickery, Clara?" he asked, his tone sharp but curious. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My eyes were locked on the space in front of him, where the skyline blurred and warped, the lights of the city bending into strange, fluid shapes. Then it happened. The air parted like a curtain, and a scene unfolded, a vision, vivid and alive. It was Hargrove, younger, maybe in his 30s, standing in a cluttered office. He was laughing, shaking hands with a man in a pinstripe suit. Papers littered the desk between them, stamped with the Hargrove and Sons logo. The colors were too bright, the edges too crisp, like a memory polished by time. I blinked, stunned. Was this real? Hargrove's arms dropped to his sides, his face paling. That's Henry," he whispered, "my first partner the day we signed the deal that started it all." The vision shifted, fast-forwarding now. Hargrove was older, closer to the man I knew, pacing a boardroom. His voice boomed, pitching a wild idea, something about a floating billboard over the river. The board members clapped, their faces alight with excitement. I recognized that campaign. It had been a legend in the company, the kind of bold move that built his reputation. "What is this?" he demanded, turning to me. His eyes were wide, a mix of awe and unease. "How are you doing this?" I don't know," I stammered, which was half true. The dust was working, but I hadn't expected this. A window into his past, his triumphs. Madame Zora's words rang in my head. "The night will bend to your will." Was this my will? Or hers? The scene changed again. Hargrove stood alone on this very rooftop, staring at the city. Snow dusted his shoulders, and his breath fogged in the cold. He looked tired, older than now. His shoulders slumped. A voice, his own, echoed from nowhere. "It's not enough. It's never enough." He flinched, stepping back from the vision. "Turn it off," he snapped. "Whatever this is, stop it." "I can't," I said, my voice shaking. "It's not me controlling it." The air pulsed, and the vision dissolved into mist, leaving only the city skyline behind. Hargrove stared at me, his chest heaving. "Explain yourself, Clara, now." I opened my mouth, grasping for words, when a faint laugh drifted on the wind. Madame Zora's laugh. My blood ran cold. She was here, somewhere, watching. The laugh lingered in the air, faint but unmistakable, like a thread of smoke curling around us. I spun, searching the rooftop's shadows, the low wall, the air vents, the doorway to the stairs. But there was no one, just me and Hargrove, his face a mask of confusion and something darker, something like fear. The wind picked up, tugging at my hair, and I felt exposed, as if the night itself were peeling me apart. "What was that?" Hargrove demanded, his voice rough. He stepped toward me, away from where the vision had been. Who's here with us? No one, I said, too quickly. It's just the wind, maybe, or part of the magic. My lie felt flimsy, but I couldn't tell him about Madame Zora. Not yet. I didn't even understand what she'd done, or why her laugh had followed me here. He narrowed his eyes. Magic? You expect me to believe this is some parlor trick? That was my life, Clara, my past, my voice. How did you pull that off? I clutched my notebook, a lifeline to sanity. It's not about tricks, I said, improvising. It's about showing you what matters, what you've built, what you could still do. I wanted you to see your own brilliance, to remind you why I'm worth keeping. It was a desperate spin, but it seemed to land. He rubbed his jaw, glancing back at the spot where the visions had played. Brilliance, huh? That floating billboard. I haven't thought about that in years, and that last one. He trailed off, his expression clouding, felt too real. I nodded, seizing the moment. That's the point. I can bring that kind of vision to the company. Big ideas, bold moves. Give me a chance to prove it. He studied me, the skepticism still there but softening. You've got guts, I'll give you that, but I don't like surprises. I can't explain. Where'd you get this? Whatever it is? Before I could answer, the air shimmered again, unbidden this time. It wasn't Hargrove in the vision. It was me. I stood in his office, younger, my first day on the job. I was nervous, fumbling with a stack of files, but my eyes burned with determination. Then it jumped forward, me, pitching the failed campaign, my voice steady despite the client's last-minute curveball. Hargrove watched, silent. I froze, my heart sinking. This wasn't my plan. The dust was showing me now, flaws and all, and that laugh echoed again, closer this time, a taunt I couldn't escape. Madame Zora wasn't done with me yet. The vision of me flickered in the air, a ghostly reflection I couldn't control. There I was, arguing with the client over the phone, my face flushed with frustration as I scribbled notes. Then it shifted, me alone in my cubicle, head in my hands, the red ink spreadsheet glowing on my screen. It was raw, unfiltered, the moments I'd hidden behind a brave face. Hargrove watched, his expression unreadable, and I felt naked, stripped bare by whatever force was driving this. Enough! I shouted, waving my arms as if I could swat the image away. To my surprise, it dissolved, the air settling back to normal, but the damage was done. Hargrove turned to me, his brow furrowed. That was you, he said, almost to himself. The real you, not some polished pitch. I swallowed, my throat tight. I didn't mean for that. I just wanted to show you what I could do, not my messes. He stepped closer, his voice low. Messes are part of it, Clara. I've had plenty, but this. He gestured to the empty space where the visions had been. This is something else. You're playing with fire here, and I want to know how. That laugh rang out again, sharp and close, cutting through the wind this time. Hargrove heard it too. He spun toward the sound, his fists clenching. Who's there? He barked. Show yourself. Silence answered, thick and heavy. My pulse raced. Madame Zora was toying with us, but why? I clutched the empty vial in my pocket, its smooth glass a reminder of the deal I'd made. Magic has a way of collecting its own debts, she'd said. Was this her game, humiliating me to save my job? I don't know who it is, I lied, my voice trembling. Maybe it's part of the effect, but it's not about them. It's about us. You saw what I'm capable of. Even when I stumble, I can turn things around. Mr. Hargrove, I swear it. He studied me, his gray eyes piercing. You're a risk, Clara. Always have been. That's why I hired you. And why I was ready to let you go. But this. He shook his head. This is beyond risky. It's uncanny. Before I could respond, the air pulsed again, and a new vision flared. Hargrove and me, standing in his office. Tomorrow morning he was handing me a letter, my termination notice. But then it shimmered, and the scene changed. He tore the letter in half, nodding at me with a faint smile. Hargrove stared, transfixed. Is that the future? He whispered. I didn't know, but I prayed it was, and that Madame Zora wasn't about to yank it away. The vision of Hargrove tearing the letter hung in the air, a fragile promise shimmering against the city lights. His faint smile in that scene, so unlike the stern man beside me, felt like a lifeline, but it wavered, the edges blurring as if it could vanish any second. I held my breath, willing it to stay, to be real. Hargrove's jaw tightened, his eyes locked on the image. Is this a guarantee? He asked, his voice low, almost reverent. Or a trick? I don't know, I admitted, my hands twisting together. It's possibility. That's what I was told. The truth slipped out before I could stop it. and I cursed myself silently. I couldn't mention Madame Zora, not when I didn't even understand her role in this. He turned to me, his gaze sharp. Told by who? You're not doing this alone, Clara. I'm not a fool. I opened my mouth to deflect, but the air pulsed again, cutting me off. The vision shifted. Now it was Hargrove, alone in his office, the torn letter scattered on his desk. But then it darkened, him signing a new paper, his face grim, and me walking out with a box of my things. Two paths, side by side, flickering like a coin mid-flip. My stomach dropped. Was this the dust showing us what could be, or what would be? Hargrove's breath hitched. What's that supposed to mean? I keep you, or I don't? I think it's up to you, I said, grasping at the threads of control. That's the magic, showing you the choice. I've given you everything I have, Mr. Hargrove, my work, my risks, my heart in this job. You decide what it's worth. He stared at the dual visions, his hands flexing at his sides. You're a gambler, Clara, always pushing the edge. I admire that, but it scares me too. The laugh came again, Madame Zora's, loud and mocking, echoing off the rooftop this time. It wasn't just sound. A shadow moved near the stairwell, a silhouette draped in fringes. Hargrove saw it too, his head snapping toward it. Who's there? He roared, striding forward. Wait. I grabbed his arm, panic surging. Let me handle this. He shook me off but stopped, glaring at the shadow. You've got 10 seconds to explain, Clara, or I'm done with this circus. The silhouette stepped into the light, Madame Zora, her eyes glinting with amusement. Oh, don't stop now, she purred, the best part's coming. I froze, dread pooling in my chest. Whatever she had planned, I wasn't ready for it, and neither was Hargrove. Madame Zora stood there, her velvet shawl swaying in the wind, a grin curling her lips like she'd just won a bet. Hargrove's face hardened, his patience fraying. Who are you? He snapped, stepping toward her. I darted between them, my heart hammering. She's a consultant, I said, the lie thin as paper, helping me with this. A consultant? Zora laughed, her voice rich with mischief. Darling, I'm the spark in your fire. Tell him the truth, or shall I? Hargrove's eyes bored into me. Clara, what's going on? I swallowed, trapped. I met her last night. She gave me something, a tool, to make this happen. I didn't know it'd be like this. Something? He glanced at the empty space where the visions had been. You mean that show? Zora clapped her hands, delighted. Oh, it's more than a show, it's fate, unwound and rewound. But we're not done. She flicked her wrist, and the air shimmered again. A new vision flared, me, standing on the pier, handing her the locket. My voice echoed, I need something extraordinary. Hargrove's jaw dropped. That's you last night? I nodded, mortified. I was desperate. I didn't know. Zora cut in, her tone sharp. You wanted magic, Clara. Now you've got it. But every spell needs a finish. Her eyes gleamed. Ask him what he wants, the job or the truth. I turned to Hargrove, breathless. What do you choose? He hesitated, the vision still flickering behind us. I need to know how this ends, he said finally. Zora smirked. Then watch. Hargrove's words hung heavy as Zora's grin widened. Very well, she said, snapping her fingers. The air flared, and a vision bloomed. Hargrove in his office, tomorrow, shaking my hand. No letter, no box, just us, working. Then it shifted, him alone, staring at a photo of Henry, his first partner, a tear on his cheek. That's it? He asked, voice rough. My choice? Zora nodded. Keep her, or keep your regrets. The dust shows what's true. I held my breath, watching him. He rubbed his face, then looked at me. You're a wild card, Clara, but I've built this company on wild cards. So? I pressed, trembling. You stay, he said, but no more stunts like this. Relief flooded me, but Zora's laugh cut through. Not so fast, the debt's mine now. She held up my locket, dangling it. This bought you tonight. Next time, it's me you owe. She vanished into the shadows, leaving us stunned. Hargrove shook his head. What have you gotten us into? I didn't answer. The real intrigue was just beginning.